Concept cars. They can be a bit weird, wild, or, well, sometimes they're quite realistic. And while the Italians are the kings of stunning machines that'll never see the light of day, there is no better place to look for something a little bit different than Japan. Japanese brands have made thousands upon thousands of cool concept cars, but these 9 are the ones we think are the very coolest. And before we move on, we'd just like to remind you to hit that like button. It's the new year. Make it a new year present to us, and then, subscribe to the channel, hit that bell icon, and then we'll move on to the very first of our glorious concepts. Hey, look at that first gen NSX. Always liked those. Hold on a sec. Why does that have the side profile of a Ferrari Testarossa? Yes, the catchily titled Nissan MID4 Type 2 concept is not in any way a Honda NSX, and actually came into existence first, about 3 years before we'd heard of the new supercar Experimental. The MID4-2 was shown for the first time at the 1987 Tokyo Motor Show and was a mid-engine, four-wheel drive supercar. It was, as the name might suggest, the second car to carry the MID4 name following the original in 1985. That first one, incidentally, also looked a bit like several other cars, but think W10 MR2 at the front rather than NSX. The Type 2 would have carried a twin-turbocharged intercooled VG30D TT engine, a V6 capable of 330 horsepower and 245 pound-foot, all sent through a 5-speed manual gearbox. It had double wishbone suspension up front and multi-link at the rear, and was pretty much production ready, but due to costs, it was never made. Instead, the engine made its way into the 3000ZX. Yes, you guessed it, the Toyota EX-3 was the third concept car to wear the EX moniker, except it was actually the fourth. Although the EX Dream Car was only ever a scale model in 1965. EX1, 2 and 3 all followed in 1969, each was a futuristic two-seater sports car, but unlike most sports car concepts of the time, which were penned by the legendary Italian houses, the EX3 was a fully designed in-house effort by Toyota. While EX1 looked a bit like the upcoming Celica, and EX2 was a smaller electric runabout, EX3 was a big, sleek, aerodynamic sports car with a very long, pointy front. It had massive exhaust outlets, which at the time hinted at a potential for a gas turbine engine, but no details were ever actually released, which is a shame, because cruising around in one of these, even today, would have been pretty incredible. This is an Isuzu Bellet. It's not a sleek and stylish sports car. This is the Isuzu Bellet MX1600 GT2. This is a sleek and stylish sports car, and it was designed by the legendary Tom Tjaarda at Ghia, and it looks like some kind of wild mix between a Maserati Bora and an Alfa Romeo GT V6. It had a mid-mounted 1.6 litre engine taken directly from the faster GTR version of the little Bellet, powering just the rear wheels, and was, as you might guess, a slightly racy two-seater affair. Think of Isuzu today and you'll imagine mud-plugging pickup trucks. But if this had been made, there's a chance their future might have been quite different. While Tjaarda never did see his creation reach the roads, he did take that wedge over to De Tomaso, which became the Pantera. So not all was lost. A Honda with scissor doors that looks a bit like a squashed Lamborghini, you say? Yeah, we'll take it. Unveiled at the 1997 Tokyo Motor Show, the JVX might look from the front like it's a special late edition Murcielago. I mean, just look at those lights. But at the rear, it was very different. And that's because this was actually a showcase of Honda's latest hybrid technology. Rather than preparing to replace the NSX and fight Ferrari, this was Honda staring the Prius in the face. And we have to say that if the early hybrids had looked like this, we might have sat up and paid attention a whole lot sooner. The JVX didn't have the Prius's ability to show off by crawling around in pure EV mode, but its electric storage was ready to help out its tiny 1-litre 3-cylinder engine, which featured direct injection. And it didn't have batteries. Instead, the JVX used an ultracapacitor to quickly store and release energy. And it had the quirkiest, most 1990s interior you've ever seen. Do not adjust your screen, it really is that purple and green. As much As we're fond of the insight that eventually followed, we do sometimes long for the idea of the JVX instead. Before we move on, we'd just like to say thank you very much for watching this video, and, Happy New Year and all that. If you are enjoying it, hit the like button and then, subscribe to the channel and all that. But then we'll move on to talk about a car from Mitsubishi. In the 1990s, Mitsubishi made six HSR badged concept cars, each one as outrageous as the next. HSR stood for Highly Sophisticated Transport Research, or High Speed Running Research, or High Sophisticated Research, or Human Science Research. Mitsubishi just didn't seem to be able to make up its mind. While every single one was utterly fabulous, it's the second, the cunningly named HSR2, that we really wish had been made the most. This one had a heavy emphasis on aerodynamics and was the precursor in the end to the upcoming Mitsubishi GTO. Underneath was a 3-litre twin-turbocharged V6 with 4-wheel drive, 4-wheel steering and electronically controlled independent suspension. Under its floor, it had moving aero flaps which could change the coefficient of drag from 0.4 down to 0.2. This one sort of got close to production, and the similarities to the GTO are pretty obvious. But the dream of seeing something resembling a McLaren Speedtail a good 20 years earlier was never realised. A 2-door, wedgy breadvan coupe with butterfly forward swingy doors. That sounds like something we'd love. Oh, and it had a rotary engine, you say? Sold. Somehow, despite being that awesome, the Mazda RX 500's main selling point, according to Mazda, was that it was all about being a mobile testbed for road safety. It had multicoloured lights to the rear to indicate if it was accelerating or braking. Fancy. Thanks to its use of plastic throughout the construction, the RX 500 weighed only 850 kilograms, which means that its 982cc double rotor engine's 247 horsepower could motor it on to 150 miles an hour. A common misconception about the RX 500 is that 3 were actually made, and as much as we wish that was true, it's not. There was and remains a single RX 500, originally painted orange. The confusion comes from the fact that between its first and second appearances, it did develop some lights. It's even been to Goodwood, back in 2014. Zooming forward nearly 40 years, we find this retro-styled plug-in hybrid hot hatch cum van with massive wheel arches and wing mirror cameras actually mounted on the wings. The Suzuki Waku SPO didn't arrive alone, coming as it did alongside the Suzuki Hanara, which was, and I quote, an autonomous driving mobility room where everyone can use transportation time and comfortable space effectively. Well, exactly. That made the Waku SPO seem positively normal. It was pitched as a compact and fun car for the weekend, and if you look at it, it isn't exactly a million miles away from what eventually became the Honda E. No technical details of the hybrid powertrain were revealed, and Suzuki was adamant at the time that it had exactly zero intentions of putting it into production. What we do know is that it had what Suzuki calls the Waku Waku switch, which would allow users to change the body style, allowing the Waku SPO to morph from sort of an estate to sort of a coupe by retracting the brown segment at the back. Why Waku Waku? Well, because in Japanese, that roughly translates to excited. You've possibly, maybe, probably, perhaps seen this one before, but it's always worth revisiting the moment that in the early 1990s Yamaha decided that it had had enough of making motorbikes and keyboards and wanted to build a small supercar with the engine from a Formula 1 car in it. Winding that back just a little to untangle part of that almightily strange sentence, Yamaha did have a Formula 1 engine. It had become a supplier in 1989. With this knowledge, the team at Ypsilon Technology, a subsidiary of Yamaha, teamed up with English engineering company IAD to do something about it, and thus the OX99-11 was born. It had that 3.5-litre V12 F1 engine at its core, but detuned to only 400 horsepower and revving to a paltry 10,000 RPM. But the F1 style technology did not end there. It had a carbon fibre chassis, a front wing, a top-mounted air intake, and was originally meant to be a single-seater. Yamaha themselves, however, requested that it become a two-seater, and so a passenger seat was added sitting line astern with the driver. It even had a fighter jet-style cockpit canopy. Unlike the rest of this list, this one, no matter how bonkers it looks, was due to be made. Sadly, disagreements between Yamaha and Ypsilon led to the project's termination, and a financial crisis meant that the expected cost of around $800,000 per car just scared off any potential buyers. And finally, the one we really think that not only we wish had been made, but we just can't see why it wasn't. The Honda Sports EV was the sister concept car to what would eventually become the Honda E, and you can see the resemblance. Amazingly, it was designed in just 6 months, and it harks delightfully back to the days of small, lightweight, two-seater sports cars. The outside was at least partly inspired by the Honda S2000. Sadly, because of that tiny development time, we have very little to go on other than it looks cool, but with Honda reportedly working on some EV sports cars as part of its continuing lineup, we can only sit here and hope that maybe, just maybe, the first lightweight EV sports car we've seen is on its way from Japan? Well, that's 9 incredible Japanese concept cars that sadly never made it through to full production, but really should have done. What do you think? Which one's your favourite? Which cars should be on this list? Let us know in the comments below.